Good afternoon, folks. I just wanted to say hi to Cindy Lou and Coletta and Alex.
Hey, Allison. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
Hi, Alex. We haven't met yet, but at some point I hope we will. Hope you're doing well.
Oh, thank you. Hope you're doing well too.
Thanks.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, Coletta. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
Was that pause because you had to think about it for a while?
No, I'm sorry. I'm troubleshooting with the commission members behind the scenes to get them on to the Zoom link.
Then I will leave you alone. Good luck.
Oh, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Howdy.
Good to see you, Moises.
How y'all doing?
Another day in paradise.
Yeah.
This is Cindy Lou. I'm just letting you know we did start the YouTube live video
Thank you.
as we.
Good.
Love the mask wall, Moises.
Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon.
How's everybody?
Good, thank you.
Like those masks, huh, Dante?
I do. I've got kind of a mask wall of my own at home. So
Yeah. I made the mistake. A relative once saw that, and these are basically masks from places I've been,
mhm.
and he didn't know that. So every time I'd see him, he'd bring me a new mask.
Well, you know,
I have a closet for that one.
understood. Nice to be thought of.
Latar, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. You're on mute. Hello, Verona. Hello, Marianne. ¿Cómo estás, Mariana? Yeah, all right. There you go, Baton. How you doing, Batar? Oh, now you're giving me sign language. You hit something and you went off mute for a little while, but you went back on again. Let's see.
Hello, Reverend Davis.
Afternoon,
Evening.
sir.
Hi,
Good
Reverend.
afternoon, Reverend.
Good.
How are you?
Everybody. Great, thank
There he
you.
is.
How's the family?
Everybody's doing pretty good, thank you. Hey,
Good.
Moses, how you doing?
It's fine, sir. I was wondering if you was gonna abandon us today.
Well, I'm in Dallas, Texas, but
All right. The
Zoom
Republic of
works.
Texas.
Zoom works fine from here too.
In another
Across
country.
across the tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
You're talking to a couple of Texans, Reverend. Moises
am I?
is a
okay.
Texan, I think, in some ways, and I am.
Oh
You're
yeah,
not
born and
from Dallas.
raised.
You guys not from Dallas, are you?
Houston.
Houston.
H-Town.
Oh, okay. Yep. Well, we in Dallas. I'm out by the Galleria.
Sure.
My daughter lives here. So,
Very nice.
yeah,
Glad you were able to travel safely.
sure. I drove down here. It took me 3 days to get here, and it'll take 3 days to get back.
Yep.
That's what we call retirement life, right, Pastor?
That's retired. Don't have to be in any hurry to get anywhere and do anything.
Oh man, rubbing it in. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. Coletta, do you think we got most of the folks here? Or Cindy Lou, whoever? I know a few are missing and a few will have to leave right at 6. Well, it's 5:02. I think we should go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. Today on Wednesday, 7 October 2020, the year, yes. My name is Moises Prospero and I'll be conducting the meeting today. This meeting is being recorded. All right.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? This is
Yes.
Stella Stenser. I'm the supervisor for the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team for UNI. I was told I could attend as an attendee. Is that correct?
I have no idea.
Yes, absolutely. You're welcome to attend.
Okay, great.
Stella, I'll go ahead and just put you in attendee status. Thank you for attending.
Oh, yes, this is very interesting.
All right. So welcome everybody. Again, if anybody has questions regarding the public meeting guidelines, please review them. They were sent out in email. We don't have any minutes today to review. Today we're really gonna, this is really the first time we're gonna be allowing the facilitators that were contracted out to come and actually facilitate the meeting. A lot of it will be about the process. So we may not be able to get to some of the stuff that we talked to last week, but we will definitely get to it now with the facilitators providing that leadership. Again, we are still a commission, we are still the decision makers, but they are there to help us, support us, and give us some good guidelines. So from there, I take it to the Langdon group. Dante, are you the lead today or?
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Moises. And good afternoon, commissioners. It is certainly our pleasure to be here and be supportive. And to Commissioner Prospero's point, you are the decision makers. You will remain the decision makers. And you have the expertise of your community knowledge and experience and community voice that you bring. And that's the important part, I think, why you are here and the beauty of the benefit that you can provide to the city of Salt Lake. So as a facilitator, personally and as the group, we have no interest in dictating anything that you do. Our role is hopefully to guide you to those outcomes that many of you commented are your desires in the one-on-ones, and we thank you for the time you spent with us on the one-on-ones. And for those who we haven't had a chance yet to speak with one-on-one, your time is coming, so we look forward. So again, our role is really to facilitate an efficient and effective outcome for this commission on behalf of the city of Salt Lake, the city council, and the mayor. And so we really want to bring best practices, help ask the right questions, help to understand the answers sometimes. And we recognize that all of you are passionate about this, or you wouldn't be here sharing your time and expertise. So we certainly appreciate that. But also sometimes that passion doesn't necessarily translate into really an understanding of what police training could or should be, what police policies could or should be. And so we really hope to provide some of that experience that we have been able to gain just in doing this work around the country. And so, again, my name is Dante James. I am based in Denver, working with the Langdon Group. And so I'll pause for a moment and allow my colleagues to introduce themselves, Siobhan and Larry. I don't think Josh is on today. He's got a family event, basketball game for his son that he's going to be at. And so, Siobhan, why don't you?
Sure, I can jump in. My name's Siobhan. I'm here in Salt Lake, and I introduced myself briefly last week, so I won't take too much time. But I am at your service and have been doing a lot of work in Salt Lake for years. So I'm our local connection in the facilitator group, and I'll pass to Larry. And you'll see me go on and off video, but know that it's because this is a transitional time for my family at this time of day. I'm sure some of you can relate, and so that's all that's about. So.
Thanks, Siobhan. My name's Larry Schooler, and I'm a father of two, husband of one, so there might be some folks in the background or noise in the background for me as well. I am a professional facilitator. I also teach facilitative leadership, and this is the bread and butter of my practice. I worked for the city of Austin in Texas for a number of years doing the very kinds of task forces and commissions that you all resemble. So I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to teaming with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. So in moving through the agenda, we really wanted to talk about some of the infrastructure, if you will, of the commission, how it makes decisions, when it meets, all of those kinds of things, subcommittees. And so we're just going to try to get through that. But really, we first wanted to have a conversation about the decision-making process, because as we watched the last few meetings and watched everyone go through the very bureaucratic Robert's Rules of Order, there's no statutory nor city requirement that you use those. And so we thought we would step into a conversation about your comfort level and what might be the best way to engage you in this conversation and moving through, not really decisions specifically, but moving through the work that we're going to be doing. So I'll pass this on to Larry, because some of his expertise is in this type of conversation. So I will pass this off to Larry.
Thanks, Dante. And I want to warn you all, I ask a lot of questions. I'm very interactive, and I never ask rhetorical questions. So if I ask a question, it would be great if you all could answer in one form or another. Thumbs up, okay? Yes? So raise your hand if you think Robert's Rules of Order is the greatest thing to ever happen to democracy. Luna, you are lonely Luna. I like to tease people that I named my second child after Robert's Rules of Order. His name is Robert, but the reality is that, as Dante said, Robert's Rules of Order are funny things, aren't they? They can help sort of formalize certain agreements and decisions that we want to make, and at the same time, I would venture to guess that since so many of you are community leaders and volunteers, certainly on this commission, you're probably not saying, waiter, I'd like to make a motion for a second glass of water. Is there a second? That it's not something that you use in everyday conversation. So what I'm going to throw out for discussion is the idea that we will take your deliberations to an entirely different kind of context and plane. And essentially what Dante and I and Siobhan and Josh want to do for you is enable you to have a conversation. And by that, I mean literally a conversation. The idea of you needing to make motions and getting seconds and then having those motions be amended and whether those amendments are friendly or not friendly is obviously something that the city commission has to worry about. It's obviously something that various elected officials have to worry about. You all are expected to produce recommendations for those elected officials, not pass laws. And you're also, I think, expected to work together on these recommendations and to endeavor to present something to the commission that represents a set of agreements, a set of ideas that everyone could live with, everyone could support. And I think sometimes when we hear the word consensus, we commingle it with the concept of unanimity. So is there anybody who has a definition of consensus that they'd like to share that they've used in another part of their world, another part of their leadership, or another part of their life? And you can unmute or raise your hand or any way you want.
Yes, I'd like to suggest that consensus means when a majority of the people in the group agree that that's what's going to happen. And if that be all of the group, then all the better.
Thank you, Reverend. Anybody else with a definition or an understanding of it? Siobhan is sort of holding the answer key in a way, but I will recognize Siobhan.
Yes, it is a bit of a cheat for me to speak up, but I would add to what the Reverend said is I think there's, in a lot of the groups that I've facilitated, I think it is tricky to move forward when somebody is completely unwilling to move forward, especially in a group like this. I think it's worth thinking about what you want to do if somebody is very much on the other side of that feeling, to say, you know, majority rules is one way to go if that's the best, if that's what the group wills, but there's other approaches as well that just say, you know, well, you know, I don't love this, but I'm not going to stop it either. It's not something I'm so passionate about that I'm going to hold the group up, and that type of thing. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, so there's a couple of parts to this, I think. One is the discussion and deliberation style, which is to say that we are going to ask you to indulge Dante and I and Siobhan and others in helping this be a much more informal conversation. And that means that we may on occasion say, ask for a show of hands as to how supportive people feel about something, or we might do a 1, 2, or 3, 1 being strongly support, 2 not sure, 3 firmly against, something like that. And that would be in service of this notion of consensus. And to Siobhan's point, and to the Reverend's point, we want you all to make decisions that you all are comfortable with. And if there comes a time where there is an issue that we just can't figure out a way for everybody to get on board with, then it might make sense to take a vote. But oftentimes there's a winner and a loser of a vote, and we hate to see that because it's so important that this diverse group of folks produce recommendations that the commission can hopefully implement and move forward. And it will be that much more powerful and palpable politically for them to do so if they know that they arrived at those recommendations by the commission's consensus. So again, I see this as being a two-part equation. One part of it is to leave the whole notion of parliamentary procedure on the sidelines for the time being and enable Dante, Siobhan, Josh, and myself to help you all talk in a more kind of normal way, if you will, a more organic way, mindful of the fact that we have a job to do. And so there may be times that we interrupt. There may be times that we intervene in some way to make sure that we maintain the health of the dialogue. But nevertheless, trying to make the conversation more free-flowing. That's number one. And then number two, when we feel that we're at a decision point, or when someone has put something forward as an idea for how to move forward, rather than taking a vote, we'll be sort of checking with the group to see if anyone has a significant concern about that idea, whether folks are comfortable with moving forward, or whether they have some questions that they'd like to ask of the person. And once we get to a place, whether by shows of hand or, you know, red, yellow, green cards, or 1, 2, 3 of ascertaining that this is something everybody can live with, then that feels like a place for us to, you know, to move forward with that decision. So I'm going to pause there, hand things back to Dante so that he can get your all's reaction to those ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. So I guess first, are there any questions on the idea of consensus? Consensus does not mean that I completely agree with what's going on. It means I can live with it and won't stop the process of it moving forward. That's how I would describe it. So any questions or heartburn around that idea of, and this isn't when we're making a recommendation of what we're going to submit to City Council or Mayor. that would be a much more formal process. This is just the day-to-day work and conversations that we'll be having as a commission. So any further questions or thoughts or heartburn around that idea? Carol?
We might actually have consensus on consensus, and that's just
I
too
was just
cool.
going to go to. So it seems as though we have consensus on using a consensus. Is there anyone who cannot move forward with that idea of using consensus as opposed to Robert's Rules of Order? Going once, going twice. Perfect.
Should I rename my child, do you guys think? Since we're moving away from Robert's
Consensus.
rules, should I rename him Consensus or something? Consensus Schooler.
So thank you. The first major decision of the commission as since we've been here. So that's great. So we'll be using a consensus model approach just as we move forward in these conversations. Next up is the frequency of these meetings. And as I said, I was stalking the commission for 3 or 4 weeks before somebody put my name in to say hello. I don't know where that came from, but I've been on the commission watching for a while and recognize the difficulty that some of you had in one meeting every week, but then also the time frame of that. And so wanted to have a conversation, which also flows into the next one, talking about whether we'll have subcommittees or not. But the idea that meeting every week for an hour to discuss everything in general or one topic, I would suggest is not the most efficient nor effective way to achieve the outcomes that I know everyone wants. And so I guess my suggestion initially would be meeting every other week. But then as we talk about subcommittees, with those subcommittees meeting in the off week. So just for discussion, that's just my first initial suggestion or thought. We would love to hear from some of you about the timing of the meetings in terms of the frequency of them.
Dante, can I say one thing before we ask others to jump in? Just that I think we've had the opportunity to talk to a few folks about this to just gauge people's feelings on it. And there were some who were a little uncomfortable with subcommittees. So one thing I just wanted to mention about that is that's really where the work will get done, where that free flow of ideas can happen. And the hope of going every other week will keep your time commitment relatively consistent, because we want to be thoughtful about your time. Keep your time commitment relatively consistent, but then give you an opportunity to really do deep dives into all these issues that need to be addressed. So that would be what happens in the off weeks. Just to clarify.
Thank you. And as an example, I would give kudos to and use the Youth Commission as an example of what they were working on last week and providing examples of policies that they reviewed and maybe thoughts and suggestions on those to come back to the full body. And that's really how the subcommittees work. It's not that the commission won't be engaged and involved in discussing everything at some point, but the meat of the work, or the sausage making, if you will, happens in those subcommittees and then would come back to the full commission for its deliberation and or any consensus or vote on this policy decision or anything else. So
I see that Moises has unmuted.
Yeah, Dante, I think meeting every week is hard, especially when we start talking about bandwidth. That if our bandwidth is getting taken up, it's getting less and less, that then it's harder to be in subcommittees. So I do like the idea of every other week. I think that's how you guys wrote it in your proposal anyway.
Mhm.
Every other week commission, and then every other week subcommittee. I like that idea.
I wonder if anybody has a concern, something or a question. Yes, Reverend.
Did you give any thought to a once a month meeting instead of every other week, and have then 3 weeks to do committee work?
We did in if you look into the proposal that we put together for the city, that's kind of in the third quarter after really the commission got its feet wet in rolling into this process. But that's your decision. It's certainly not ours, and that can certainly be on the table for conversation every other week or once a month with the subcommittees meeting and having a longer opportunity for meeting in that regard. So that's certainly on the table, sir.
I've been a part of a number of other boards, including the Utah Board of Regents, the Utah Board of Corrections, and all of those statewide boards with responsibility for all over the state met once a month. And in between, everybody had assignments that they brought in and they reported on what they had done. And so I'd like the commission to consider that as an option, as opposed to every other week, once a month, have a commission meeting and 3 weeks to work on a particular issue. My suggestion.
So my recommendation would be to kind of check in with each of you and figure out where you're sitting with this right now. Is weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly something that you're feeling most comfortable with? And Dante, I just want to check an assumption of mine, which is that were the meetings to be less frequent, I'm assuming that you're thinking that it might be a longer than 1 hour meeting if there are fewer meetings, because of the fact that, you know, we wouldn't have had as much discussion time. So it might be a 2 hour meeting as opposed to a 1 hour meeting. And I know that folks have, you know, a myriad number of obligations, but hopefully, you know, if I'm correct in Dante's, you know, assessment, we could figure that particular part of this out.
Thank you for bringing that up. And that's absolutely true. I mean, if there are going to be subcommittee reports for consideration, that's probably going to take more than 60 minutes. So I would suggest that the more that the commission meetings are spread out, the longer they may be, from 90 minutes to 2 hours once a month, or 90 minutes every other week, that kind of thing.
So let me check in. I can take a volunteer or I can call on commissioners, but I really would like each person to share some thoughts. Nicole, Commissioner Salazar Hall.
Yeah, Reverend Davis, I'm on a statewide commission, and they do meet monthly with a bunch of subcommittees meeting in between. I'm kind of in favor of every other week only because of how many issues we have, and I'm a little worried that if we meet just once a month, if we get to the end of our agenda and something hasn't been addressed like it does on this other statewide commission I'm on, it gets pushed to the next month. And I think some of what we're dealing with may be a bit more exigent than a policy on how to address a visit in rural Utah like I do on the Child Welfare Improvement Council. So I'm kind of, I don't disagree with the once a month model. I think it works, but I'm wondering for this one, I think every other week might be a little better. And that would give off weeks for subcommittees to meet and do some work.
Thanks very much. Luna, I saw you, Commissioner Benuri, unmute.
I wanted to wholeheartedly agree with Nicole. I think the issue that we have at hand at the moment, the urgency of policing and everything else that's going on, I feel twice a month would be great to keep the continuity and keep the focus and keep rolling.
Thank you very much for sharing. Who else would like to share? Commissioner Powell.
Good afternoon, commissioners. As a youth subcommittee representative, I think it'd be efficient for us to meet on a bi-weekly basis. That way we can remain a consistent schedule within the subcommittee, and we can bring actionable items into the commission meetings and then bring that information back to the subcommittee for the weekends.
Thank you very much. And I do want to echo what Dante said earlier about the extraordinary public service you're giving, and we really appreciate it. Commissioner Scott-Umaga, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it.
You're good. I like the idea of meeting every other week. You know, there's definitely a sense of urgency that we're dealing with, and so I think it is important to keep that urgency and to keep it consistent by meeting every other week.
I appreciate your input. Commissioner Shiflett, it looked like you had raised your hand.
as much as I think I'm going to agree with every other week as well, because of the urgency. I agree that I would love to do once a month, but because things keep happening, I think we need to stay on top of it.
So I'm noticing nods of the head. I want to see if there's anyone who wanted to share a different point of view about a different level of frequency. I'll pause for just a second. So Reverend, I'm going to come back to. I'm going to come back to you just to see if.
I have another. I agree with Reverend Davis. I think. I'm sorry if you give me the time. Sorry.
No, Commissioner, please, Commissioner Buttar.
Yeah, I think we all have professional jobs, and every week and also has been really difficult. And but I think you know, I understand the urgency that we need to do the work. But I think you know, having subcommittees to do the work and then report within in a month, I think we could achieve a lot, because we all have so many different board meetings that we attend on a monthly, and we do a lot of things done in that 1 month meeting.
And so, Commissioner, before I go back to Reverend Davis, Commissioner Buttar, if there was perhaps a transition of sorts, so that going from weekly to biweekly and perhaps then extending to monthly when it felt like that was suitable, would that be something you would be comfortable supporting?
Yeah, that's, I mean, whatever majority decides, but I definitely, you know, if we can have transition, and also if there's times where there's urgency that we could call for another meeting,
Right.
I'm okay with that as well.
I appreciate that. Reverend, you were starting to say before.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't have any heartburn with either of the ways. And I'm willing to go with the bi-weekly, since it seems the majority is willing to do that. I'd like also the idea of being able to call a special meeting whenever there's a hot issue.
Thank you very much, Reverend. It looks like there's a lot of agreement on that particular idea. Before I go any further, folks, I'm referring to Reverend Davis as Reverend Davis, and I've referred to all the rest of you as Commissioner. Please let me know if there's any other title that I should use, but I happen to be a religious person, so Reverend Davis's title means a lot to me. At any rate, Dante, I would say that this group is in a position, and I'm going to look for nods of the head or thumbs up from you all, so please you know, be ready to indicate that. But it appears that this group is comfortable with moving to an every other week full commission meeting for the short term, with subcommittees meeting on the off weeks, and the option to add an additional full commission meeting where necessary, and also options to reevaluate this rhythm as we move forward. So, commissioners, does that feel like something that you all can live with? Either nodding head or thumbs up? Okay. Dante, does that work for you?
It works for me if it works for all of the commission. So I thank you very much for consideration of this, and I really do believe that you will see the benefit of kind of this structural change in terms of effectiveness, and you feeling very much that some work is getting done. So I hope.
So, forgive me, Dante. As a practical matter, I wanted to ask, and I'd also like for staff, maybe Coletta or Cindy Lou, just to be engaged here. As a practical matter, I wonder whether we should decide as a commission that our next full commission meeting would actually be 2 weeks from today, as opposed to next week, and that next week would still be reserved for possible subcommittee meetings. So staff, I guess I want to check with you. Are there any issues associated with doing that from a, you know, agenda posting and other, you know, Open Meetings Act and so forth obligations?
No objections or concerns. We just need to post the agenda 24 hours in advance. So on the 7th, if the subcommittee meeting's determined and you decide to post that, as your discussion moves ahead in subcommittee,
yeah,
we'll consider that. We don't have any concerns with those 2 meeting dates.
Okay. Let me check on that then, just taking the pulse is having, and I know we still need to cover the subcommittee topic, so I know this is a little tricky, but I just want to see if folks could be amenable to having this meeting be followed by a full commission meeting, say on October the 21st, 2 Wednesdays from now. And that it might be an hour and a half or 2 hours, but that we would, do our best to manage the time. So I see Commissioner Salazar Hall, some other commissioners. Any concerns about that?
Question.
Yes, sir.
Did I hear Dante suggest that you have, as the Langdon Group, some contractual obligations regarding how many times we meet?
No.
No, sir. No, we and as a matter of fact, if it would be helpful, I'll kind of look at Dante and Siobhan before I do this, but I mean, I certainly could put up on the screen what Dante's referring to in the way of a work plan, but I would not consider it to be contractual as an obligation at all. It's just a proposed map, roadmap that we put to the city that they agreed with in principle. So it's not in any way binding.
Right. We are obligated to meet with you when you meet, be it in full commission, be it in subcommittee, be it every week, every day, although I don't think that'll work. But so there is no contractual relationship for the number of times that we are expected to meet. No.
Okay. So Commissioner, and I'm so sorry, I haven't learned how to pronounce your name yet. So please help me.
Give it a try.
Angela Weirden.
That's remarkably good, actually. Yeah, thank you. I just briefly, no concern about what we've decided. In fact, I appreciate working or meeting every other week initially, and then extending it. Partly because it's so difficult to get to know each other on Zoom, and we really haven't had a chance to bond as a board, and so I like meeting more frequently than extending it to a month. But just regarding missing next week's meeting, I wonder if there's a way we can put an announcement to folks who generally tune in every week for the commission to ensure that our transparency is there and people don't try to come to a meeting that doesn't exist. So I don't know the best way to do it, but I think
that's very helpful. I in fact subscribe to y'all's email, the system where you can get an email. And I certainly believe we should alert the public, and we will talk actually about public comment here in just a few minutes, but that's a very important point, Commissioner, and I think we can, Steph, Coletta, Cindy Lou, others, I assume that there's a way to sort of put out notifications to that effect.
Yes, we can do so.
Great. So in a future conversation sooner than later, I think would be about the social media for this commission. How is the commission speaking to the community? How is it being seen, being heard? What's the social media presence and footprint for the commission? And I know that was a part of some of the conversation I think that we were supposed to assist with. So working with the city staff, I'm sure we can delve into that conversation maybe at the next meeting.
So if it's okay, I'd like to, I'm sorry, Commissioner Shiflett, you had your hand.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Of course.
I want to know, I have another meeting on the first Wednesday of every month. So I leave this meeting and I go straight into that meeting. So how will we determine what weeks we're going to meet?
That's a good question. As it happens this week, it looks like we'd be on first and third if we were to switch over. It sounds to me like it might be easier for you if we went second and fourth, given that other obligation. I'm reluctant to get too deep into calendars with the full commission here, but I think that what we may want to say right now is that we'll stick with sort of alternating, but perhaps maybe circulate a scheduling poll of some kind just to see where commissioners might have any preference. And I would think we could just make a determination based on what worked for the most number of commissioners. And so if there's standing commitments like yours, we could hopefully work around them.
Thank you. That will save me 3 hours at least.
Very well.
Happy to be helpful.
That was going to be a question if it was going to be every 2 weeks or if it was going to be twice a month.
Oh, good question.
Yeah,
I think we were thinking every 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah, I think we were thinking every 2 weeks, and then on months where there was a fifth, we would meet 3 times. Yeah, yep. I think that's correct. Let me, as we pivot to talking about subcommittees, I want to just make one one or two quick notes from my perspective and then hand it to Dante, for whom I think this is an area of his expertise. I know that there's a little bit of anxiety around, feeling like perhaps discussions would occur in subcommittee that a commissioner would feel unable to participate in. They're either not on the subcommittee, or maybe two are meeting at once or whatnot. And I think that there are a couple of things that would be important to me as you all think about this. Number one, it's up to you all to determine this, but it would be my thought that subcommittee work should be as transparent as full commission work, as it relates to the public's ability to track that work. Now, you all can decide for it not to be. You're within your rights to do that. But I think that the public interest in your work is extremely high, and the desire to stay looped into it is very high. And so I think that there's, and Dante can get into this in more depth, but I think there's some desire for it to remain, open. I also think that we as a team of facilitators stand ready to assist the subcommittees as we are this full commission, to whatever extent the subcommittees want us to. So some subcommittees may just want us there to observe and pipe in every now and again. Maybe other subcommittees would appreciate having a facilitator, but we certainly, I think the four of us would certainly want to be able to assist in that regard. But let me pass to Dante for a little bit more on subcommittees, if I could.
Thank you. And your final point is absolutely correct. We stand ready and able, I believe, to really help the subcommittees as they need assistance, and to whatever level that assistance is needed. And also that it should be public. The public is engaged and involved and interested in all of the work of the commission. And so that's certainly your decision, I think, depending upon the number of members on a subcommittee, as I understand. But maybe that's a city attorney question on your open public meetings requirements. But just in terms of subcommittees, I know that there's the youth subcommittee. I believe last week you essentially put together a subcommittee to address the SROs and talk about the educational impact to the SROs being there. And I'm not sure if that's a standing committee or just standing meeting. It's now there and will be there until this commission is no longer in existence, or is it very specific to addressing a very particular aspect and it will be done? And
Dante, I'm gonna interject one quick thing, which is to enforce an acronym-free zone unless the acronym is initially defined. So I know that everybody knows that SRO stands for School Resource Officers, and yet I just want to make sure that no one goes through an entire conversation wondering what the heck is a whatever. So forgive me for interrupting you, but I want to try to get us in the habit.
I appreciate it. And so the idea of the committees that I'd like us to talk about now would be standing committees that exist for the length of the time the commission exists, to do that work and present their work back to the full commission. And so I just have a couple of suggestions. One, I know that there's a large conversation around training, and the training lieutenant came and did a presentation, and there were a lot of questions, and I think still are a lot of questions. But training is such a foundational component to police, what they do, how they do it, how they think about how they do it, and not just what happens in the academy and then they are now full-fledged police officers, but what is the in-service? What is the continuing education of that training? And for those officers, what does that look like? Who's participating in the training? Who's giving the training? Lots of questions can be asked. Understanding if there are national standards for the training and what level does Salt Lake City meet or exceed in those standards. But training is such an important component. I would suggest that there needs to be a specific committee just for training and the training division and the training work. And then secondly would be, for lack of a better term, just a policy committee that looks at use of force, data issues, compliance, and that can cover a lot of your 800-page document that they gave to you. But I think that as a foundational component, those are two committees that I've seen work in other areas. and make some significant changes and recommendations for changes for police department. Because we're talking about culture change. Throwing policies at police won't necessarily change what happens on the street. So training is a big component of the culture. And so how do we evaluate that? And then certainly use of force and accountability for what folks do and other things in those policies. So I'll stop talking. And those would be a couple of suggestions I would make, but I'm open to hearing the commission's thoughts on subcommittees and its work and their work.
And let me, from a process standpoint, come at it this way. I'd love to hear from a commissioner who initially who wanted to throw out any other type of subcommittee that they would like to see considered, almost like a mini brainstorm. Not that we need to, come up with a list of 20 or anything, but if there's a commissioner who wants to put another topic for a subcommittee out on the table, I'd like to do that first. And then I'd just like to get the sense of the group as to which of these topics they think warrants a subcommittee. And then we can get into who would like to serve on which and so forth. So either by show of hand or unmuting or any other way, just let me know if you'd like to. I see Reverend Davis unmuted.
Yes, I think another committee that we ought to consider is the Use of Violence Committee. And I don't know if that would be under policy or not, but just the use of violence policy and practice.
Yeah, thank you, Reverend. And I do think that would fall under just broadly a policy commission, because the use of force is often dictated by the policy of what can or cannot be done versus what should or shouldn't be done, but what can or can't be done. I mean, policy around chokeholds. Can you use one or can you not in terms of use of force? What is the definition in Salt Lake City of the use of force? If I pull my weapon, is that a use of force or is that a demonstration of force? I mean, we can get into those deeper kinds of conversations, but I would suggest that it falls within that policy subcommittee.
And Reverend, I want to make sure, because these are important words, that when I heard you say use of violence, I was hearing use of physical force, by a law enforcement officer. Was that your intention?
Well, that's part of my intention, but I'm also concerned about the use of canines, use of weapons,
right.
Those a knee on the neck, for those kind of issues.
Understood. Yes, sir. Okay, so we were talking about potentially either a subset of policy or its own subcommittee around use of force, use of violence. Others with an idea for a subcommittee that they haven't heard yet and wanted to put on the table?
I'm attempting to share my screen so you can track what we're talking about, so that there's a visual tracking tool. Was there one more?
And the only challenge I have with that is that it's a little trickier for me to see everybody when we do that.
Okay,
but,
I'll take it down, but know that I'm tracking it and I can show you at any time if you're losing track.
Thank you very much.
Was there one more though? I feel like I'm missing one.
Let's put use of violence as its own for the time being. Just, I mean, in respect of Dante's thought that it could fall under policy, but let's leave it there just in respect of the Reverend's suggestion.
Okay, and then I will stop sharing, but if anybody is losing track, I'm happy to pop it back up at any time.
But it's use of force, I think I've said.
Use of force. Okay,
Use
I'm
of
sorry.
force.
Initially, I heard you say use of violence, so I want to make sure use of force. So again, any other ideas folks want to put on the table for subcommittee topics? So, I do see Commissioner Powell.
It's my recommendation that we start a subcommittee that perhaps interacts with local criminologists and perhaps mental health professionals when inquiring on how we can actually discover let me reframe my question. Ultimately, I suggest having a subcommittee that is primarily focused on measuring the social affluence between, not affluence, but involvement in cases sorry, I'm struggling to kind of word it, but someone that basically goes into the psychology between interactions between communities of color and law enforcement. So maybe someone who's more qualified in that field other than police officers or commission members. I think they could be a benefit when we need actual statistical evidence and data. I also recall someone mentioning last meeting on perhaps interacting with professors at the University of Utah, such as Dr. Smith, who has released reports that such as racial battle fatigue, which we could utilize in these rooms and spaces as well. I'm just looking for more productive ways for us to actively engage off of the subcommittees.
Thank you.
Great.
Let me ask this question, if I might, for my clarification, or to put this in context for me. So I guess my first question in my head is, to what end would that end be? To inform the subcommittees that's working on training, and that could inform how the training comes and is utilized and or created or modified? Would that be to inform policies around use of force and different things like that? So I guess I'll stop with my question. Is that kind of the outcome that you're looking for in that engagement?
Exactly. Thank you for summing that up for me.
Okay.
I'm going to share to show you how I captured that. And while I do that, I want to just say one thing that, as a reminder, and for those who maybe read our proposal or did not, so number 5 is where I tried to capture that, just make sure I got it right. We have a group on our team from Pepperdine University and who has done a lot of work throughout the country. So I guess point being, we have some academics on our team that we have access to, but that's just one piece of this puzzle that you presented to us. So just, that's more of an FYI than anything else. Let me know if you want me to capture that differently, and I'll stop.
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent idea. I would suggest that it's not mutually exclusive from the work that a training subcommittee could do, or a use of force or policy committee could do. They could in fact reach out to better inform themselves by reaching out to many of the folks who you described. So if that makes sense, there's no reason that the committee couldn't do that. And I don't know that a standalone subcommittee would be as fluid and pass through of information to those.
Yeah, I hear a little bit of a risk of siloing in Dante's comments,
Right.
to where the folks who need to look at data associated with a particular topic would be sort of waiting for a subcommittee to produce it, as opposed to being able to independently seek
Hear
it
it
out.
firsthand.
Right. Other members who wanted to put any other topics for a subcommittee on the table?
I could request.
Yes, Commissioner Benuri.
I could request a place.
I'm so sorry. Your sound is a little muddled. Could you speak again?
Is this better?
Yes, it is. I can hear you clearly.
I'd like to request a placeholder under surveillance, the way surveillance affect policing, for example, for ICE and other enforcements, TVE funding and the way that gets utilized, all of that in a separate committee. I'm happy to discuss that further, but I don't want to take up the time of the main committee at the moment.
Siobhan, how did you capture that? I want to make sure we get it the way Commissioner Benuri is.
I'll share that right now and show you. Make sure we got it. I just said what you said, surveillance and how this informs ICE work and other things. Is that accurate? Okay.
Thank you. I want to be cognizant of time. If we're trying to stay to an hour for you, which is always rough, if we could agree on anything that we've heard so far, is there some consensus around one?
Yeah, I was going to.
But Larry, I'll let you go through with that.
No, that's okay, Dante. I was just going to take pulse on the subcommittees that have been put up for discussion. And so I This is a little tricky because I do want people to be able to see the list, and I also want to be able to see all of you. So let's experiment here a little bit. Siobhan, if you would reshare. I may need to do a little bit of scrolling just to make sure I can see everybody, but I'm seeing just about every commissioner now in my screen. So let me start with training and see, you know, a raised hand either means I'm fine with this subcommittee existing and or I'd like to be part of it. So if you feel that a training subcommittee is worthwhile, a subcommittee devoted to looking at training for law enforcement and or would like to be a part of it, let me see that with a show of hand. And if you are not on video, maybe, yeah, Commissioner Buttar is putting it in the chat. So that seems to have a lot of support. So I think we can consider that to be a subcommittee. Let me turn to policy, and I want to shift back to Dante very quickly here because I want to make sure that the group understands the intent behind your idea for a policy subcommittee and see whether it can be sort of big enough tented, if you will, to allow for the consideration of things like use of force and perhaps surveillance, although maybe that should still stand by itself. But I'd love to just hear quickly from you and from the Reverend about, you know, whether use of force could be considered within policy as opposed to whether it should stand alone.
Thank you. And yes, that's one of the huge components I'm thinking of when I think of policy is use of force. When can you use force? What's acceptable use of force in a particular situation? What types of things can you not do? I mean, can I fire at a running away subject? Can I fire at a driving away car? I mean, those are the types of policies that address use of force and varieties of use of force as one huge component of a policy subcommittee.
Go ahead, Reverend.
And I want to make sure that when we talk about use of force and other issues, that we're talking about policy and practice.
Absolutely.
So it's not just policy, but it's policy and practice. And if that area of policy covers both of those areas, the actual document and what is actually the practice, then I'm okay with that.
What I hear in that, Dante, pardon me, is sort of the actual policy in word and the way in which that policy is carried out. So it's of a piece. Practice and policy to me are closely related in the sense that it's, well, here's what we've put down on paper as being the policy, but here's what's actually happening as it relates to the implementation of that policy. Is that fair, Reverend?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rev.
That's fair.
And I was also going to suggest or add to what you said, Reverend, was that what I hear you really talking about is accountability. And so there's accountability if I violate this policy. That's really what we're talking about, I think. And so how do we ensure that there is accountability to this, which also then becomes a conversation around culture change, that it's expected of me to hold you accountable for a violation of policy X. So I think all that rolls in together, Reverend.
Okay. So I see Commissioner Eldridge with her hand.
Yes, thank you, Reverend, for sharing that. I also feel too that accountability needs to be its own subcommittee, whether it's oversight and accountability. I think that in itself is a lot to cover. And that goes along with being transparent with the community, that if an incident happened, these are the steps that are happening and that officers are being held responsible.
So what I hear from Commissioner Eldridge is that even if accountability and oversight is in some way a policy, it kind of needs its own undivided attention from a subcommittee. And so one other thing I want to just make sure we have on this list so that we're all clear is that a school resource officer subcommittee was sort of formally put forward last week. And so we may end up combining forces somehow, but I just want to make sure we don't lose that as an action this body took. So, Reverend, let me go back to you briefly. would you, I want to kind of square Dante's suggestion of a policy committee that examines things like use of force, the policy and the practice, with your desire for use of force to get sort of its own undivided attention. And so
could we write it policy / practice and make sure that both of those aspects are included? Not just policy, but policy and practice.
If I could, an example of a committee that I worked with in a previous location was entitled Data Systems, Use of Force and Compliance Subcommittee. And so it evaluated all of those that you're describing. It also evaluated compliance with those. It evaluated the data around those uses of force. And so it was a comprehensive subcommittee as it related to policies around use of force and what that looked like, and violations thereof, as well as what's the data show around how it's being used.
So here's what I want to suggest, folks, because I think we're trying to do important work here, but I think that less important than the name of the subcommittee is the substance that we want those subcommittees to consider. So what I'm hearing is that there is a strong desire for a subcommittee that would evaluate, as you see under 2AB, policy and practice as it relates to accountability, oversight, use of force, and then I heard in what Dante was sharing, compliance as a sort of a subset of practice. So what I'd like to do, rather than sort of wordsmithing as a full body, is check and see if folks are comfortable with a subcommittee that we would name here, between now and when it first meets, that would take on this set of tasks. I do want to come back to Commissioner Eldridge. I know you said, accountability and oversight is very important and perhaps warrants its own subcommittee. So let me touch in with you first. And actually, before I do that, Commissioner, I wanted to make a note. There was a chat comment. Siobhan, if we can change School Resource Officer Subcommittee to School Safety Subcommittee, that appeared to be a mistake on my part. So Commissioner Eldridge, would you like this group to still consider a whole separate subcommittee on accountability and oversight, or could it fit within this kind of policy and compliance body that we're discussing?
It could fit either way. I mean, I just feel like that there have been a number of incidents here in Salt Lake City within the last couple of months that transparency has been lacking, and then also really trying to understand holding officers accountable, and then also the follow through with whether charges fit with, the behavior and the incident happening.
So
but
what I'm hearing you,
I'm with where the direction the entire commission wants to go on that.
what I'm hearing from you is it's a priority for you, and as long as it's getting substantial consideration, that's what's important to you, that we spend solid focused time on that particular aspect of this broader topic. So let me do this for efficiency's sake. With hands raised or otherwise, is a policy and practice subcommittee named to be massaged with these kinds of topics, subtopics, if you will: accountability, oversight, use of force, compliance with policy. Is that something you're comfortable with this body having as a subcommittee, and or you'd like to serve on it? Hand raised if that's the case. Okay, so thank you for that. And as I said, I think it's helpful maybe to take offline, maybe with the core group or in some other way, just a cleaner name of sorts for that body. As I mentioned, we've got school safety and we've got youth. I want to come back to Commissioner Powell, not speaking of youth, but speaking of your idea.
Really quick, Larry, there was one other that I just thought of that might be helpful, is officer recruitment. What recruiting efforts are made within Salt Lake City Police Department. Because that alone does play a lot into culture.
Okay, why don't we add that to as number 7, Siobhan, or whichever, doesn't make a difference. The order doesn't matter. So just coming back to Commissioner Powell, there was a really good exchange with you and Dante around, your desire to see criminologists and mental health professionals engaged in this dialogue, and perhaps that being done by bringing those folks into these other subcommittees. And I want to check with you and see if you can live with that as opposed to having a standalone subcommittee like this. I'm seeing a nod head.
I think the youth subcommittee is one of the representatives for this current meeting. I think that would align with what we're looking to do.
Okay.
And then in that same breath as well, maybe we could go ahead and clarify the position and standing of the youth subcommittee and how we can better involve them in these current forming subcommittees.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, and that was, I guess, our question. We weren't quite sure how the youth subcommittee was formed and connected to the totality of the commission. Is there any reason that the youth subcommittee can't be joined with one of these other committees working on the work, or does it prefer to stay separate and have its own component? We weren't quite sure and didn't want to assume anything. Right, we're both.
The way this was set up is that we wanted to keep it around 20, but when we brought up and we do want to make sure that we hear their voice. So we decided to have that youth subcommittee and yet have those rotating. But I could easily see within that youth subcommittee saying, hey, these other subcommittees, you guys, if you want to join in on all these, I think that's quite easy to do.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So we'll go for now with the assumption that Commissioner Powell's great suggestions on engaging criminology, psychology, and the like would be incorporated into the work of the subcommittees. And so then we've got surveillance, and we've also got what I'll call recruitment, human resources, and so forth. And so let me turn back to, I think it was Commissioner Benuri, if she's still there, because I believe you had brought up surveillance. And I wanted to ask you whether you, how strongly you feel that it should be its own subcommittee, or whether you think it could be covered by any of the others.
I'd like to hear your suggestion as to where could it fit.
Commissioner, could I ask you to define a little further what you mean by surveillance? That might be helpful.
So in my understanding, certain communities are surveilled. There are surveilling techniques, surveillance policies that the police uses. It probably is interagency as well. And then that translates into action against different communities. And there are pretty contentious ways that these policies are implemented and the way policing happens in our community. I gave ICE as an example. The cooperation or non-cooperation between interagency, we need to understand if the Salt Lake Police does that. There are also anti-terrorism TVE dollars that come into different cities and counties, how those get allocated and what programs are run under those, because they also have surveillance embedded in those programs. So it's a pretty large footprint of how surveillance kind of works in our community. And that's what I would like to understand and work on to see how we can make it equitable.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I'm not sure how Salt Lake PD works, but typically there's a policy decision, which is also a political decision to join the Joint Terrorism Task Force, for example, and how that works and plays out. There's a policy around whether we are going to work with ICE and enforce federal issues, as opposed to some cities saying, we're not going to do that. It's just not going to happen. So oftentimes that comes under the idea of policies and or just practice. But I would suggest more often than not, that's policy, or some of those are just political decisions about what's going to happen. Go ahead.
In my
No.
opinion, policies are affected by people and commissions like these. So, and that's also one of the discussions that I'd like to have. We have representation from different communities. Once they understand how this works, probably they will have input as to, for the mayor, at least for the city, if we want to be part of these interventions or not. And if we do, then how would policy change translate into what kind of actions?
I understand. I understand that. Okay, thank you.
So, Commissioner Benuri, I want to honor the clear interest, passion, knowledge that you're bringing to this topic, and at the same time, sort of figure out what's going to be easiest for us all to manage in terms of participation and management of the group. So I guess my question is, if you were given assurances that, for example, this policy and practice subcommittee would thoroughly examine the surveillance practices and policies that you were talking about, would that satisfy you, or do you think that it should remain as a standalone?
You know, I wanted to bring this into the conversation, and I'm quite okay for the group to chime in and see where would they want to see it placed. I don't want, I'm not asking for, copyrights on this. So if you feel we can handle it under policy, for sure.
Let's just check in. I mean, with the hand raised, just for efficiency purposes, do you feel that the surveillance topic that Commissioner Benuri has brought forward is something that could be put under the auspices of the policy and practice subcommittee, and that would be the best way to handle it? I'm seeing a couple of yes in the chats. I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. Commissioner Benuri, I do want to come back to you, though. Despite you not having a copyright, you do have certain pride of ownership here. So, how does that sit with you?
What was the word you used in the beginning? Implied?
Pride of ownership, just that, psychologically you own this, if you will.
No, I mean, I see the group consensus and I'm going to go with the consensus.
Well, thank you very much. So what that leaves us with is Commissioner Salazar Hall's suggestion of perhaps a subcommittee that would look at recruitment of officers. And I guess I would like to just maybe based on efficiency, see if folks want to support it as its own subcommittee. And so I think a raising of the hand would be, I'd like this to be a subcommittee, or I'd like to serve on it, or both. So if that's the case, if you could show us that.
Larry, could I just add to that a bit?
Yeah, please.
I totally agree that it should be addressed. I'd like to add to that not only the recruitment, but the hiring practices and retention and promotions and transfers. And those are all critical areas of culture within a department. And I think that recruitment also dovetails nicely with community engagement. So in order to track a diverse set of candidates to come into the department, we have to create an environment where people would want to come and work. And I think that part of that is the relationship with the community that the department has. So I think that recruitment subcommittee is actually quite big, or the concept of it. So anyway, I just wanted to add expanding that.
I'm glad you said that, because I almost called it the Human Resources Subcommittee a while ago, which isn't what Commissioner Salazar Hall said. So I didn't do that, but I do hear your points very much. So Commissioner Salazar Hall, just coming back, I mean, I saw you nodding your head. It sounds like you'd be supportive of that broadening of the scope.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Commissioner Underwood.
So I think unless anyone has anything else they wanted to add to that conversation, it sounds like there's energy behind a subcommittee for that kind of hiring, recruitment, promotions concept. And so what that leaves us with is a committee for training, a committee that we might rename that's going to deal with various policy and practice, including accountability, use of force, compliance, surveillance, a committee to look at school safety, a committee made up of youth and youth concerns, and perhaps to be renamed subcommittee that it deals with recruitment, hiring, and promotions and community engagement. So are there any commissioners that want to make any additional comment about this? Commissioner Davis, rather Reverend Davis?
Didn't we agree that the youth subcommittees would be assigned within the other committees?
That actually sounds right, but I want to make sure that that squares with others' understanding. Commissioner Powell, is that the way you understood it? Commissioner Prospero?
From what I understood from Commissioner Prospero was youth subcommittee members will have the option to participate in any of these listed committees. And in our bi-weekly meetings, we can communicate that, and the next representative next week can give you a list.
Great.
That works.
And,
Thank you very much.
Still operate as a separate youth subcommittee, though. Is that right, Bill Powell?
Yes, sir. As of now, not all the current youth subcommittee representatives are quite comfortable with moving forward to being on the main commission.
All right. Good enough.
I hereby decree we will do nothing to quelch the flames of civic participation that I'm seeing out of the youth subcommittee. It's really awe-inspiring. So here's what I think we should do, and I'm saying my thinking out loud to Dante and Siobhan and the team. Since we're over an hour, I would recommend, if you all would indulge me, that I spend maybe 60 to 90 seconds talking about public comment and public participation, since it is on our agenda. And then we try to defer most other matters to our next commission meeting, and also make sure we have a roadmap for these subcommittees to potentially begin meeting perhaps next Wednesday evening. So handing things back over to Dante, does that work for you?
I think it does. I think we need to schedule that meeting of some sort to determine who wants to be on what committee, when they will meet, all of those logistical kinds of things.
Right.
But I certainly say thank you for really putting this, the meat into your conversation today and recognizing the variety of things that will need to be addressed, because it's a big pie. And so being able to cut it in pieces will make a huge difference.
You've made me extremely, extremely hungry, Dante, and I'm very angry at you for that. But yes, I agree with that, and I would suggest, and we can talk with staff, but we may be able to, devise some sort of polling where we can get each individual commissioner to give us their subcommittee interests, and then, arrive at some scheduling, draft scheduling and staffing, to go along with it. Let me just briefly, folks, touch on public participation. As I may have mentioned, that's a big part of the work that I do. I do public engagement training and consulting for a lot of municipal governments around the country. It would be my recommendation that, especially with a less frequent full commission meeting, and with subcommittees who may benefit from hearing from the public, that you all try to reserve time at the beginnings of your agendas to allow for a certain amount of public comment. Now, I'm saying that mindful of the fact that our team is responsible for delivering to you all a very robust, multi-part, multi-pronged sort of listening session plan, so that it's not simply a matter of who can show up to these meetings and make a comment, but that we'll actually be doing very focused listening sessions with a variety of different populations across the community and giving people a variety of ways to give us input. But even having said that, I think that the significance of this topic to large swaths of the public and the optics of having public meetings really lends itself to allowing for some public comment at the beginning, perhaps limited in amount of time or time per speaker. But I'd like to check that with you all, given our change in meeting frequency and some of our other plans, and see if that would be something you all would feel comfortable with going forward. And so when I teach my students facilitation, I tell them to check silences. And so the total blank stares that I'm getting make me wonder if that's a sign of support or concern. So I see Commissioner Prospero.
I don't know if I understood their question.
So my question,
every 2 weeks, should we have it? Is that what your question is?
my question was, as part of every full commission meeting going forward, would there be time set aside for members of the public to speak at the beginning of the meeting in a time limited fashion? I mean, not an endless array of speakers for as long as they wanted, but whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you all felt was appropriate, but a dedicated slot at the beginning of the meeting. Seeing some nods, comments?
As long as it was time limited, it'd be fine. Because I really want us to really focus on the work, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Understood.
Other perspectives or opinions?
Yeah, and I'm okay with it also as long as there's a specific time limit given.
Understood. And we can certainly keep time, for individual speakers as needed. Just want to get a quick check as far as hands, if folks are comfortable with a public comment period that's time limited. Okay. Commissioner Tedeschi, Commissioner Powell, how are you feeling about it? Feeling okay? Okay. Just like to check. Thanks, Dante. I just felt like that would be a helpful thing for us to check off.
Larry, stop picking on the youth.
Picking on, I thought you were going to stop putting them on a pedestal, because that's what I really want to do.
Yeah.
But I'll turn things back to Dante.
Thank you. And being respectful of time, we've, I think, accomplished a lot in a very short period of time. So things can't happen when you don't need Robert's Rules of Order. So I will offer my thanks and the thanks of my team, not my team, but the team, the Langdon Group, because I think we really see the passion and commitment to doing this work and making it happen as efficiently and effectively as possible to make it in the best interest of all the residents of the city of Salt Lake. So I will pause and turn it back over to Chair Prospero today and see if he has any final comments or he'd like to make to wrap it up.
One, I congratulate you for rolling the R. Although the accent is on the first O, Prospero. And as far as not calling titles, if you could remove the commissioner part of calling me Moises or Mo is great for me. We're gonna go ahead and I think it was a great work. Thanks a lot, Langdon Group, for facilitating this. We appreciate it. I'm excited to get on these. I need more subcommittees to join, so thanks for that. And so with that, we go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank y'all.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.